Hey everybody, this is Arthur. It's been about a year since I've gone on Facebook Live to share my thoughts on a number of issues. I know I was doing this on a more frequent basis last year, and I know there's a lot of things that I've thought about and wanted to talk about, and I've also written. And this is a chance where, especially with the end of the year and as we go into the Iowa caucuses starting in January, I really wanted to just put everything out there as far as why I'm no longer supporting Donald Trump and why I am supporting Governor Ron DeSantis for president. I've gotten a lot of backlash from people about this. There were a lot of people in the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, whatever you want to call it, who were really shocked or surprised, saddened, or just really outraged that I don't support Donald Trump anymore. Well, everything really started falling apart. I can't, well, didn't really start falling apart, but things started to change for me even in 2019 when DeSantis became governor of Florida. I was really stunned by how many of his strong policy proposals, whether it came to enacting E-Verify or taking care of education issues or dealing with corporate abuses in the state of Florida, they received widespread support across the board from Floridians, Democrat, Republican, Independent. I was really impressed by that. I was reading articles early on about Governor DeSantis and how he was implementing a number of incredible reforms and changes in leadership. And he was working very well with people of all backgrounds, of all political backgrounds. He worked with Republicans, Democrats. He did a very strong conservationist push in the state. He was dealing with environmental issues very well in a free market fashion, but also ensuring that quality of life was protected and that dangerous or destructive algae blooms weren't eroding or destroying the Everglades and other environmental issues in the state. And I thought that was really interesting. He was able to cut a very fine line on key issues and did very well leadership wise. He was getting everybody's attention for the better. He got my attention on a greater level in 2022 when he took the lead to put an end to LGBT promotion in the classroom, starting with kindergarten through third grade. And in fact, let me go back a little bit. His first week in office as governor, he rescinded protections, non-discrimination protections. Every governor in every state, they issue an executive order that all state employees will be free and safe from discrimination based on race, sex, creed, religious background, etc. He conveniently, properly left out sexual orientation and gender identity. That was a good sign right then and there, and that caught my attention. This is a governor who wasn't afraid to stand up to the LGBT agenda. He wasn't going to be pushed around by that. A recent criticism that I read from somebody said that I'm just caught up in that one issue. And that's not true. I've been a consistent activist against illegal immigration and now mass immigration. I see the problems with mass immigration too, that even stopping legal immigration is appropriate, especially now since our borders are not secured and there's no enforcement of our immigration laws. Immigration and also the perverse corrupting power of public sector unions and labor unions in general. I'm very much for free enterprise. I believe in the freedom of labor, freedom of movement. I'm very much a right to work supporter. In 2016, just as a gentle reminder, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker was my first choice for president. Even as far back as 2013, I had written an article for a local website saying that the Republican Party needs a new alpha dog to lead the pack. I didn't name names in that article, but in the back of my mind, I was thinking of Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. Unfortunately, he flamed out within 2 months after announcing in July of 2016. I can say that Governor Ron DeSantis has learned from a lot of the campaign and process failures that Scott Walker had made when he was running in 2016. But at any rate, Governor DeSantis was getting my attention in a lot of ways. He was passing strong enforcement mechanisms against illegal immigration. He banned sanctuary cities. He started passing E-Verify reforms. They weren't perfect. There were some industries which were exempted, but half a loaf is better than none when you're dealing with the state legislature. And the same is true when it came to the parents' rights in education legislation. That was in 2022, I believe, in which any lessons on sex, gender identity, homosexuality, etc. would be curtailed in grades K through 3. I mean, it's just unthinkable why any adult working in an educational setting would want to be talking to kids about sexual degeneracy or induce into kids that they are in the wrong body and they should get a sex change. This is just unthinkable. Now, I look at it from a political perspective and I can see why the legislature started with K through 3. Because it was the easiest move, it was the easiest bill to defend. Because like I said, who in their right mind would think it's okay to be pushing gender identity or homosexuality or teaching these themes to kindergartners? It was a very easy argument to make. And of course, Governor DeSantis followed up on that this year, and they extended the parents' rights in education reforms all the way to K through 12. And what was really wonderful about those parents' rights in education reforms is that it sparked copycat legislation in other states across the union. Iowa did it, Georgia, even in Idaho. We're still working with activists and legislators there to get those bills passed. Idaho is a tougher nut to crack, and so is Wyoming. Some of these mountain states, they're more purple in terms of they're more libertarian leaning. They want just local control, and there's a lot of big business that runs the state legislatures there. But all of this was a big reason why I liked DeSantis. And then, of course, he took on Disney. He was able to stand up to the corporate abuses. He was able to take on the biggest donor and the biggest lobbyist in Florida state politics, and he won. Governor DeSantis has shown consistently, whether there's a culture war, whether there's a financial war, he will go all the way and win. Another example of this was during the redistricting fights. Every state legislature, every 10 years, they have to do a census, and then they have to redraw the state and congressional districts. And the Republican state legislature was very weak, and they wanted to stick with the status quo. Governor DeSantis pushed through a more aggressive redistricting plan, and he was able to create a new congressional map in which 20 Republicans got elected versus 8 Democrats, whereas the legislature had given him a weaker plan, just the status quo, 16 Republicans and 10 Democrats. There was this real consistent push for vision. This is all before Governor DeSantis was even making open statements about running for president. What I saw was a clear-cut, unwavering conservative voice. He was fighting for the policies he cared for. He ran on the promises, and he won, and he got things done. As an executive, he removed corrupt officials from election offices in different counties. He also got rid of the bad sheriff in Broward County. He got rid of the George Soros district attorneys. He was really committed to using state power to achieve good ends. I loved how he went after drag queen performances, how there were drag queens performing at hotels where children were present, and DeSantis used the state power at his behest, and he took away the liquor license. That kind of creativity, using state power for good ends, not violating the law, not violating the Constitution, but using the powers that were granted to him, was really compelling. And I like that. There were a couple of times I pointed out that DeSantis is better than Trump. I was writing about this in 2022, 2023. So if people have been following any of my social media, they shouldn't be too surprised that I liked Governor DeSantis. Now, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? Because even as far back, even in July of 2022, I had a sign and I was supporting Trump DeSantis. I thought DeSantis would be a great VP, and Trump could run for president. And I had no problem with that. There's things that Trump didn't do. I was aware of the spending. I was aware of, his seeming moderation on some cultural issues. And I said, okay, well, you know what? Trump is still the better man compared to Biden. We definitely needed Trump versus Hillary Clinton. So I respect that. But what was the straw that broke the camel's back for me? It was in December of 2022. when Donald Trump was celebrating with the log cabin Republicans. This is a cultural Marxist organization. You have homosexuals and transgenders calling themselves conservatives when they are not, infiltrating the Republican Party, wanting to destroy the platform, remove the pro-life and pro-family planks. And they are big advocates. They're big supporters of Donald Trump. They were all at Mar-a-Lago. And why were they specifically celebrating? Because Congress had passed the Disrespect for Marriage Act. This is a marriage act which would impose on the states that they would have to recognize same-sex marriage licenses. And I said, you know what? Here's Donald Trump, and he's playing it up, and then he's talking about how we've got to fight for gay rights, and we've got to fight for LGBT. And this was following what happened in June of 2022, when the RNC had announced a so-called Pride Coalition, again, promoting prominent homosexual, prominent transgender Republicans, quote unquote, and Donald Trump was all in on this, and that was really upsetting. I did not like that at all, but I wasn't ready to throw him under the bus, and so there was that. There's some people who are commenting, and I appreciate it. I'll get to the comments after I've made my larger case. So for me, I've had enough. What I saw was not only Donald Trump having liberal positions, but I saw him saying one thing to one group of people and then saying something else to another group of people. He would go to churches. He went to Robert Jeffrey's church a second time, I think it was last year or earlier this year, talking about wanting to fight for religious liberty, wanting to fight for Christians to be able to preach and speak and have their faith. And he mentions Jesus Christ once in a while in his speeches, and I was really grateful for that. But that for me was the final point. I said, I can't support this guy anymore. That was the starting point. And what often happens in politics, we pick and choose what we fight for, what bothers us. We're willing to look at politicians and we see some things that they do that I don't like, and we put it aside if we think that the good outweighs the bad. But with Trump, it had been like a repeated chain of abuses. And that was the last straw for me. That was in December 2022. So from there, it's gotten easier to look at the points of criticism. And frankly, folks, we really can't ignore this. In 2020, we had an unprecedented pandemic-induced collapse pushed on this country. Well, let me correct that. People keep saying COVID shut down the country. COVID did not shut down the country. Folks, it's time for some tough love here. Donald Trump shut down the country. He was the chief executive then. He went along with all of the bureaucrats, including Anthony Fauci, right at the top, and went along with shut down the country, shut down trade, shut down the cruise industry. He went along with all of this. And it was 2 weeks to slow the spread, and 2 weeks turned into 2 months, turned into 2 years under Joe Biden, who continued this catastrophic abuse of power, all under the guise of protecting public health. But Trump started this, folks. Trump started this. And what can I say? Part of the reason I'm doing this Facebook Live is that I'm not really interested in having heated discussions or arguments with people who have been longtime friends of mine and who still support Donald Trump. And I don't feel like, and I don't want to lose friendships, lose contacts, lose long-standing relationships with people because we have a disagreement over a presidential nominee. I think that politics should not be that absorbing in a person's life. I don't want that. But at the same time, I hear the arguments, I hear the disagreements, I hear what people say about Trump, and I bite my tongue because I don't want to get into a shouting match with somebody. So here I am going through Facebook Live. Folks, Donald Trump shut the country down. That's on him. All of the bad things that happened during COVID, all the bad stuff that happened with those Democrat governors who issued their lockdowns and their shutdowns. I live in the state of California. We had the worst lockdowns under horrible Governor Hair Gel Newsom, okay? But none of that would have ever started if Donald Trump had really followed science rather than listening to scientism and listening to the healthcare bureaucrats or the public health bureaucrats in Washington and not locked the country down. If he had done what the president of Sweden, or this is really disturbing, it's really embarrassing, the dictator, the fake president, the dictator of Belarus, Lukashenko, he didn't lock his country down. I mean, this is really embarrassing. You have the head of state in Belarus, I think Viktor Lukashenko, that's his whole name. Viktor Lukashenko did not lock his country down. The dictator presided over more freedom in his country than most of the Western world. That is really embarrassing. That is really disturbing. I have a real problem with that. Okay? We can't ignore that anymore. And it really bothers me. People are all in for Trump, and they think he's a great guy, and they think he'll do a better job the second time around. He locked the country down while he was president. How many, I say to all the current Trump supporters, if they do watch this, who live in Orange County, LA County, who I've interacted with many times over, why is it that you sweep this under the rug? Why do you think it's okay? Well, I can say I've gotten some responses from people. Some people say to me, well, Trump was misled. He was surrounded by bad staff. He was surrounded by bad people. And you know what? That's not an excuse. I'm fed up with that. Abraham Lincoln, he was in a lot of ways an outsider as well. He had one term in Congress. He got thrown out. He was a failed postmaster. He had been a failed officer in the Union Army or in the U.S. Army because he wasn't a soldier during the Civil War. He was the president. But when he was president and he needed good generals to lead the Union fight against the Confederacy, he went through one bad general after another. If a general wasn't doing a good job, he fired him immediately and hired another one. Donald Trump didn't do that. A lot of times he surrounded himself with bad people and didn't get rid of them. Or worse, the advisors like his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. He allowed him to push a lot of the policy. That's not acceptable. This was a problem going on even early on. When Steve Bannon left the White House in 2017, people were already sounding the alarm. There's something wrong here. Now, another reason I'm doing this Facebook Live is it's kind of a partial confession. I was really negative towards Ann Coulter. I thought she was turning into an unbearable crank. I remember that cartoon by Ben Garrison, who does those really good cartoons about Donald Trump and conservatism and other things. And there's a picture of Donald Trump dressed up as Santa Claus. So this is an appropriate time to have this discussion. So there's a picture of Donald Trump dressed up as Santa Claus, and there's all these presents with all the stuff that he's done. And there's a picture of Ann Coulter, who looks like an incorrigible brat yelling, "Where's my wall?" And at the time, I kind of agreed with Ben Garrison. I thought, you know, come on, Ann, chill out. He's president. He's working on it. He's doing what he can. He's facing all these hardships, etc. But here we are, like 5 years later, and I'm finding that Ann Coulter's criticisms were well placed. She was right. Doesn't mean she's right about everything. I'm still pro-life. I think it's a mistake to start embracing a pro-choice position or try to treat abortion like it's a non-issue. I think that we've got to find better messaging. We've got to find a better way to deal with stuff. I've been looking at Ann Coulter's prior speeches, prior interviews, previous articles. She wrote 2 articles in December of 2016. This is right after Donald Trump won the election, and she was sounding the alarms somewhat. She pointed out that Donald Trump has to be really careful. He could throw everything away if he surrounds himself with the wrong people, and he gives up on the signature promise, which was to build the wall, to stop illegal immigration, to deal with this issue conclusively. And then a week after, it was December 7th, she wrote another article, how the establishment wants to ruin Trump. And he had an interaction with a reporter, and it was a liberal reporter from the New York Times, of course, and he says to the reporter, "I'm going to make sure you write good things about me." So there was this vanity streak that Trump was dealing with early on. And within 2 months of the administration, Ann Coulter was complaining. This is the second month of the Trump administration, and there are 0 miles of wall built, and so on and so on. And the immigration issue was really important. Now, why did a lot of us push that aside? Because the economy was good. Gas was cheaper. Our enemies feared us. There was no foreign wars. We didn't go into new wars. We didn't see, NATO was being pressured to pay their fair share. These were important things that he did establish. I will say, however, in February of 2017, when Trump issued the surgical missile strike against Syria, right away I started to panic, because his whole premise, his whole campaign had been about staying out of the Middle East, stopping the foreign conflicts, etc. And I'm like, what's going on here? If there's no troops on the ground, then there was nothing to worry about. So I said, okay, whatever. So I've been talking about COVID. I don't understand why current Trump supporters continue to sweep that under the rug. I spoke to one prominent conservative here in California. He writes a well-read, well-published newsletter. I don't want to say too much because I feel like I'm sharing something without his permission, but I think I've said enough. When I confronted him about this and said, why are you still supporting Trump? What about COVID? This commentator, he did acknowledge that was a grave mistake. It was wrong. It was wrong for Trump to shut the country down. But you see, my view is, if it's a grave mistake, grave means fatal. It means it's over. We got to move to somebody else. And worse yet, all the things people say that they loved about Trump: good economy, everybody could get a job who wanted one, energy costs were down, no foreign wars, the trade deals were getting worked on a little bit, incomes were up, wages were up, all of that, Trump threw it away. He threw it away with COVID. He threw it away. And not only did he insist on the lockdowns, not only did he insist on all those metrics, he shamed and degraded state governors who insisted on opening up. First, there was Brian Kemp. I believe he was the first one who took a firm stance and opposed the president openly. And I remember even during, I think this was in April of 2020, I said, Donald Trump, you're wrong, and Governor Kemp is right. But let's get to the bigger issue, is Governor Ron DeSantis. Because Florida is the third largest, most populous state in the union. And DeSantis, I am aware there were some metrics, there were some health protocols that he did institute. But then he switched gears right away. He started following real science. I believe it. I see it. He looked at the research. He looked at the evidence. And he said, we're not doing this. We're opening everything up. And folks, I know a lot of people, the pro-Trumpers, anti-DeSantis types, they're talking about how people got arrested, people were fined, all this stuff. DeSantis never directly punished anybody for violating so-called COVID protocols. Those were county officials in liberal counties in Florida who did that. And DeSantis pardoned every one of them. He went to every effort to pardon, to waive those fees, to waive those fines, to ensure that nobody suffered for doing the right thing. And you have conservatives across the spectrum, people who are current Trumpers as well as former Trumpers, even in those days. Everybody went to Florida. Turning Point USA went to Florida. CPAC went to Florida. Dennis Prager went to Florida for his events. Daily Wire, everybody went to Florida. Florida was a real bastion of freedom against the medical tyranny and the federal overreach of the federal government under Trump. Folks, all you current Trump people who are friends and family, why are you still supporting Trump when DeSantis had this incredible record of courageous leadership? And remember, DeSantis barely got elected in 2018. He won by, 30,000 votes, and there was voting irregularities, and it took a few weeks to settle everything. But DeSantis won, and DeSantis did the right things. And a couple of current Trump supporters have commented, and I would like them to leave a comment why you insist on still supporting Trump despite this incredibly positive record by DeSantis in contrast to the terrible record by Donald Trump. I mean, folks, I was in Orange County in April of 2020 flouting these lockdown orders, opposing these medical impositions. I was standing against this. Governor Newsom had issued a statewide mask mandate, and I didn't comply with it outside. Now, I will acknowledge, in stores and in enclosed spaces, I did wear the mask. I tried to stop it, but people wouldn't serve me. And I was in a situation at the time, I didn't want to risk police involvement. That's just the situation I was in at the time. That changed in 2021 when the sheriff announced that he wouldn't enforce any mask mandates or health mandates from the county. Then I started to openly and frequently defy every health protocol. Okay. To me, that's a big issue. But then there's other issues too. And I didn't understand the full picture of it at the time. We're back to 2020. Everything was thrown away in 2020. Whatever goodwill, whatever successes, whatever record of accomplishment that Donald Trump had, he threw it all away in 2020. Not just with the COVID, not just with the lockdowns, not just with going along with the health surveillance state, but after George Floyd. You have 4 police officers who fought for an hour with a drugged up felon who had tried to pass a counterfeit $20 bill at a local store in Minneapolis. For an hour. The entire video was released to the public, folks. This is public knowledge. They didn't abuse him. They were trying to restrain this guy because he was out of control. And when Derek Chauvin had his knee on his back, not his neck, everyone sees a guy who then died. He didn't die from asphyxiation, folks. He died because he had all those drugs in his system. He had uppers and downers running in his system. And yet you had race riots, Marxist riots across the country burning down major cities. And Trump did nothing about it. Trump did nothing about it. Ann Coulter has been really stressing this part. Because at the time when I was in the midst of all the chaos, I was with 2 friends and we drove to Santa Monica. I thought there had been looting a few days ago. Foolishly, I had misread the news. The looting was actually happening in real time. I saw what was happening to Santa Monica. I witnessed it. I took photos of it. I video recorded it. Some of the looters attacked the car that I was driving in. One of the people, and we were all Trump supporters then at the time. This was May 2020, right? There was a guy sitting behind me, and this guy was just recording everything. He was acting like this was Grand Theft Auto 5, like it was a video game. And the guy was foolishly saying, I'm going to roll down my window and ask these guys what's going on. And I yelled at him. I felt like it was like something had overtaken me. Sit down, shut up. No, you're not. I really raised my voice. I scared the guy. He had never seen me raise my voice like that. That guy has not talked to me since. I mean, I became like a different person. No, you're not. Don't you understand? We're in the middle of a riot here. These people could stop this car and destroy this car. I saw the riots with my own eyes. I was in the midst of it in Santa Monica, driving. I think we were driving west on Wilshire, and then we went to Santa Monica Boulevard to drive east to get the hell out of there. And Donald Trump just tweeted law and order. Folks, Trump was the chief executive. And that brings up other issues. So I made the decision. I gave myself permission. I'm not supporting Trump anymore. But it wasn't just the LGBT stuff. Just like you take the string and you open up a big bag of cat litter and all the cat litter starts to spill out, that's what started to happen for me with Trump. So, law and order, it was all talk and no action. He tweeted about it multiple times. And you know what? It wasn't just 2020. Antifa and other black bloc cultural Marxist terrorist groups, they had been engaging in sustained violence and public property destruction in Portland, Oregon. This had been going on for years, almost entirely throughout the Trump administration. They destroyed federal property, folks. And Trump didn't call in the National Guard. That was an appropriate time, a necessary time for Trump to do something, and he didn't do it. He didn't do it. It was all talk. I say to all my current Trump people, how can you ignore this? And why do you continue to believe, well, he didn't do it this time, but next time he will? I mean, it reminds me, I don't know if any of you have watched that cartoon, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, but it reminds me of the Mooninites. This is one of my favorite episodes. If you know me, you know I like Aqua Teen Hunger Force. Maybe it's a guilty pleasure. And there's a scene, the Mooninites come back to that city in New Jersey, And then they go to Meatwad and they want to tempt him to go do a whole bunch of crazy stuff with him. And Meatwad says, "Oh no, you don't. Last time you were here, you shoved me in an old lady's mailbox and you made me moon Boy Scout Troop 364." And then Ignignot and they say, "Oh well, this time we won't." And then Meatwad goes along with it. And this is an irony because a lot of the Trumpers, they call Ron DeSantis Meatball or Meatwad. Well, he's anything but. He's the real deal. But that's to me what I'm getting from a lot of these current Trump supporters. It's like none of that matters. And I'm just astonished. I really don't understand it. I spoke to one prominent conservative. He's a great guy. He's a friend of mine. I would never question his sanity, his integrity in any way, shape, or form. And what he did say to me is, I'm still supporting Trump because he represents the middle finger to the establishment, whether it's the corrupt media, academia, the government, etc. Okay, I can understand that sentiment. However, we already gave the middle finger to all of those institutions in 2016. That's what 2016 was for. We've already given the middle finger to the establishment. And why do you think the empire is striking back the way they are? How come we see 1,000+ people sitting in a DC gulag? That is the empire striking back. They don't like the fact that Hillary Clinton, who was supposed to be coronated as our next president in 2016, it didn't happen. We've already given the middle finger. But we as conservatives, constitutionalists, as general citizens, we need to expect more than virtue signaling. Sure, the left can't meme, but they win elections, but they can corrupt the judicial process. They can undermine our constitutional system of checks and balances. We need to be fighting that. That's what we need to be doing now. And it's not happening. Here, it was in late 2022, right? So another problem with why I'm done with Trump and I'm going with DeSantis is 2022. It wasn't supposed to be just a red wave. It should have been a red freaking tsunami. And all the polling indicated this. And it didn't happen. And Trump's response was to blame the pro-life movement. Not to consider that a lot of the candidates he propped up were terrible. And there's no better proof of this when you look at Georgia. In Georgia, every Republican statewide won, and by wider margins. And especially they won despite not having Trump's support. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, he got reelected. Brian Kemp, not only did he get reelected, but he got elected by a broader margin. He's one of the most popular governors in the country. The only failure was the U.S. Senate race, because Trump wanted Herschel Walker. Now, when you're in the fight and you want your team to win because it's an election season, you ignore stuff. But I don't live in Georgia. I talked to voters who did. I talked to conservatives who did. And they're conservatives. They voted for Trump both times, etc. And they told me Herschel Walker was a bad candidate with way too much baggage. But why was Herschel Walker even the nominee? Because Trump wanted him to be the nominee. And we saw this problem over and over again. Trump puts out some tweet and says, I want this guy running for governor. I want this guy running for U.S. Senate. They have no ground game. They have no message control. They have no persona. They have nothing but issues. It's all a vanity project for Trump. And leadership is not about you. It's supposed to be about everybody else. And that's something Governor DeSantis really focuses on that. I want to fight for you. I want to fight for you. And what's even better about DeSantis, he doesn't just say it. He does it. He has done it. Folks, I think we need to really rethink the idea of we need a complete outsider to get into government, especially at the presidential level. I'm beginning to think that's wrong. We need someone who has been in government, who has used the processes of government to do the right things, who have stood up to the challenges, who have stood up to the temptations. And I have seen that by and large with Governor DeSantis. He has already demonstrated that. Stood up to the medical surveillance state on COVID. He stood up to Disney, the largest lobbyist. And I am fully aware all the current Trumpers point this out. I know that DeSantis got Disney money. He got Disney money. I am aware of that. To me, it makes me like him even more. He got donations from Disney, and then he beat down Disney. I love it. I don't care who gives you money. I care about how you govern. And DeSantis delivers. And I am still astonished that people don't see this, don't get this, don't care. Trump promised big, and he got some stuff done, but the key promises, like securing the country, ensuring our freedoms, and let's talk about the foreign policy stuff. You know, Trump kept talking about making NATO pay its fair share. I've got a better question. Why are we in NATO at all? Shouldn't Europe take care of European problems and Europe's issues? Why are we even still part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Why? And Trump didn't do that. It was, let's pay, they got to pay their fair share. Why are we even paying a share? Let's have that discussion. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. I love the stuff that happened. I'm glad he moved the embassy. I think that's a big deal. It saves money. It also helped establish peace. I'm glad for the Abraham Accords. Don't get me wrong. But I think that evangelical voters, I've said this in a debate, and I'm saying it again, I think that our standards, we need to have higher standards. It's not enough to virtue signal about Israel. You need to do good things for America. We elected you to be the president, the congressman, the U.S. senator for the United States. You can be a good Zionist without spending taxpayer dollars. You can support Israel, but that doesn't mean neglecting your responsibilities as an official, an elected official for this country. And that's something else too. There's a group of current Trumpers that are anti-Zionist. They're even anti-Jewish, which is really repugnant. And I just think it's so ironic that they will just get in lockstep behind Trump, who did a lot of stuff for Israel and had Jewish people in his coalition, Jared Kushner, and something that was really egregious, and I've complained about this. Some people were surprised. Jonathan Pollard, an American, and he was Jewish, and he was spying for Israel, and he was convicted in the 1980s, and he went to prison, federal prison, for it. And Trump pardoned Jonathan Pollard. And Pollard went to Israel. Netanyahu greeted him. I was disgusted by that. I was very unhappy about that. You can be a Zionist and not love the government. Okay? I think everybody needs to understand that. I was disgusted. I was appalled. What's going on here? That's not acceptable. And let's talk about pardoning. This is another reason why I wanted to do this Facebook Live. I know this video is going long, but this has to make up for all the discussions I wish I could have with current Trumpers that I feel I can't have because I don't want to lose the friendships. I don't want to lose the larger relationship, but I'm just putting it out there. Donald Trump pardoned Duncan Hunter Jr., who was the former congressman in San Diego County who misused campaign donations. He gets a pardon. Kwame Kilpatrick, the former corrupt felon, former mayor of Detroit, was pardoned. Philip Zodiates was not pardoned. He was a Christian who helped a mother and her daughter escape from a lesbian relationship, and all he did was transport her from one state to another, and he was charged with federal kidnapping charges for no reason. We appealed to the Trump administration. No pardon. Donald Trump pardoned Jared Kushner's dad. But the biggest group of people that should have been pardoned by President Trump, and he didn't do it, it's the January 6th people. The January 6th people. Trump could have pardoned them. From January 6th to January 20th, he had 12 days. 12 days, there would have been initial review of the events that happened on that day. Trump could have and should have and didn't issue a broad pardon to every nonviolent individual involved in the events of that day. There were people who broke glass. They should be prosecuted. There were people who hit police officers. They should be prosecuted. And by the way, the police officer who shot Ashley Babbitt, he should be prosecuted. But that hasn't happened because there is two-tier justice in D.C. I do not believe that Trump instigated an insurrection. It was not an insurrection. Notice how I'm not saying it's an insurrection. Most importantly, even the FBI, they reviewed, they investigated the whole incident. It was not an insurrection. You had a lot of peaceful people who they were let into the Capitol. They were allowed in because the doors are locked from the inside. They were allowed to walk in, and they were even escorted through the building by Capitol Police. Trump could have and did not issue a pardon. So all of this talk about how he calls them hostages and how he wants to help them, talk is cheap. I'm sick of it. And speaking of other pardons, he didn't pardon Edward Snowden. He didn't pardon Julian Assange, real journalists who exposed the corruption in the deep state. And Trump didn't do it. And you want to know why? This is my feeling, and this is some of the noise I've heard. He didn't do it because he was afraid that the Senate would convict after the second impeachment. And my answer is, if you're the leader of the free world and you want to do what's best for America and Americans and want to put America first, you do the right thing no matter what the cost. These are very damning issues, folks. And to all the current Trump supporters, why do you ignore this? Why do you sweep it under the rug? It's not okay. This is wrong. Governor DeSantis is head and shoulders above Trump. Now, he's not perfect, and I will mention some criticisms I have of DeSantis. I'm done with treating politicians like heroes and putting them in a golden aura. We've got to stop doing that. We must do that all the time. We should never relent in our expectations for more freedom and more constitutionalism. And you have to do that with every politician, Republican or Democrat. What else about Trump? Why I can't support him? Because again, just like I'm pulling the string off the kitty litter bag and all the kitty litter is now spilling out. What else? When we campaigned, all of us, or when we went to rallies in 2016 or even afterwards, we were all shouting, "Lock her up." I went to a rally in Anaheim, California that was hosted by Latinos for Trump. Marco Gutierrez, that's when I first met Marco. What's up, guys? I hope Marco's doing all right. People chanted, "Lock her up, lock her up." Hillary Clinton should be locked up. She violated federal law. She destroyed federal records. She bit her emails. And Donald Trump made a great statement at that second debate. "I'm going to get a special prosecutor to look into your case." But within a month of getting elected, he had a rally in December of 2016. And when everybody started chanting, "Lock her up, lock her up," he said, "No, we're not going to do that. I was just kidding. That was great to say on the campaign, but we're not going to do that." And then on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2017, he had his inaugural ball. Bill and Hillary Clinton were there, and Donald Trump gave Hillary Clinton a standing ovation. That sent a clear message. That weakness, the fact that he broke that key promise, that sent a message to the swamp, to the deep state, to the bureaucracy, to the surveillance state that's operating in D.C. to go after Trump. Folks, it started at the beginning. Even Breitbart News called him out on that. Now Trump is saying, "I'm going to go after the Bidens. We're going to investigate the Bidens. We're going to lock them up." You really believe them? He didn't lock up Hillary. He didn't go after Hillary. He didn't get the special prosecutor to go after Hillary. How can people ignore this? I'm just stunned. I'm stunned. I don't get it, current Trump people. How can you ignore this? In contrast, Governor DeSantis, he got rid of not just one, but two George Soros prosecutors. He removed them. He has the power to do it. And you know what? Donald Trump had the power to remove bad U.S. attorneys. He had the power to do that because it's his job as an executive to appoint those officials. Again, DeSantis has a record of results of accomplishing these promises. He has already shown he can stand up to the press, and he does a much better job of it, too. He doesn't get into this constant backlash. He doesn't spend time on Twitter tweeting at people and attacking them. He just finishes off dishonest media, and he moves on to the next task. He just gets the job done. He surrounds himself with better people. He is knowledgeable. He is ideologically, he is principled, ideologically driven. He's principled by constitutional norms. He wrote an entire book about the Federalist Papers or about the United States Constitution. I've been trying to get a copy of it, but it's very hard to find. DeSantis is really committed to views and values, and positions and ideas. Just like Javier Milei, the recently elected president in Argentina. I've done a brief comparison of these two. Milei sounded a lot like Trump. They've compared Milei to Trump. But there's a stunning difference. There's a fundamental difference. Javier Milei is an economist. He was studying free market issues. He was studying these principles. He believes in these principles. He campaigned on those principles, and he's accomplishing them. Donald Trump had no real policy vision, nothing that he internalized. Nothing that he internalized. He just basically went along with whatever would get him those Republican votes. But it wasn't a real commitment. And we saw that during his 4 years. Folks, he didn't build the wall. He didn't build the wall. That was a signature promise. That's what made him a #1 polling candidate. And I was watching the debate from August of 2015, how he was #1. And he made the point during the debate itself. I'm the only one talking about illegal immigration. I'm the only one who's talking about building a wall. And he didn't build it, folks. I looked at a White House archive from January 12th, 2021. Donald Trump had a press conference to celebrate building 46 miles. 46 miles. And Donald Trump gave himself a pat on the back. Really? 46 miles. That is not building the wall. That is building a racket court. And then you have surrogates like Kari Lake and others who will say, well, Trump forced the Mexican government to bring the Mexican army along the border. That's not a wall. That was a Band-Aid for a gushing wound. That was not a wall, folks. And that is a signature promise because that's what catapulted Trump into the presidency. It was his stance on illegal immigration, on crime, on bad trade deals, and all the foreign wars. And these are issues that didn't resonate with me as a conservative. I live in the South Bay section of LA County. We're not hurt by illegal immigration. Massive legal immigration doesn't undercut businesses or engineering groups around here too much. Not that I had known of. Crime has not been as much of an issue. Well, it is now because we have George Gascon as our corrupt George Soros DA, and Governor Newsom has neither the power nor the will to do anything about it because he's okay with it. So it's like crime, trade deals, terrorism. These things have not impacted the South Bay as much as they've impacted so many parts of the world. And I wrote an article and I acknowledged this. I'm a blue state conservative. I supported Walker, then Bobby Jindal, and then Cruz because I was driven by principles, economic freedom, cultural conservatism, and constitutional principles. I've always been driven in that regard. And that's why I like Scott Walker, then Bobby Jindal, Cruz. But Trump's the nominee. I supported him. I'm glad he won. But we're like 8 years after the fact, and all the great promises that he ran on, there was the key ones that he didn't accomplish. I know I was on CNN in a panel, and I said he's kept many promises. That was based on the Heritage Foundation. They had a big list of things that he did. All of it had to do with regulatory rollback, and that's okay. But I love what Ann Coulter keeps pointing out. Jeb Bush could have done that. Marco Rubio, John Kasich could have done that. Obamacare didn't get repealed either, folks, and that is a huge problem. And you don't see a lot of Republicans right now talking about that, except Governor DeSantis. He talked about repealing Obamacare, and then Trump started talking about it again. Trump was in office for 4 years. See, election 2024 is going to be really interesting if it's going to be Trump versus Biden. You're going to have someone who served for 4 years and another candidate who served for 4 years. There's going to be a record and a referendum on both of them. And the focus should be exclusively on Joe Biden, who is an absolutely evil, puppet-driven, China-first horror of a president. And yet when it comes to Trump, he's going to be held accountable for failing in a lot of ways too. And other things, the trade deals, the USMCA trade deal actually was not that good. It was like a little prettier than the previous NAFTA agreement and had a lot of LGBT stuff in it, by the way. The John Birch Society warned me about it. The John Birch Society was telling people this is not a good trade deal. It still opens up kind of world, it takes further steps toward one world government, etc. I'm looking at it, I'm at nearly the 50th mark here. Boy, time flies when you're just speaking your mind. And this is stuff I couldn't just write in a paper. I wanted to just speak my mind as I'm speaking to current Trump supporters. Ron DeSantis, he promises and he delivers. Ron DeSantis is Trump with brains, with brawn, with courage, and with commitment, and with a record of accomplishment. Everything Trump said he would do, DeSantis actually did. And DeSantis actually had to do more when it came to fighting illegal immigration, because you can't build a wall around Florida. You can't. And in fact, that was a key point brought up during the 2018 campaign. Governor DeSantis, how are you going to deal with illegal immigration? You can't build a wall. They have the strongest E-Verify reforms. They have banned sanctuary cities. He got this done. In fact, the Florida legislature gave him a weak bill and a strong bill, and he lobbied for the strong bill. Governor Abbott was kind of missing in action on that issue. He didn't even call a special session to deal with sanctuary cities. And only recently has Abbott actually given the power to state and local law enforcement in Texas to arrest these illegals. And that's the first criticism. DeSantis hasn't gotten that done yet in Florida. That needs to be done. Okay. But here we go. DeSantis delivers. DeSantis has done great on the Second Amendment, on finance issues. Trump increased the national debt by $8 trillion. Trillion with a T. Trillion with a T. We have inflation today in part because of Trump. It's not just Biden's fault. And I've talked to current Trumpers, and they have to acknowledge it. It's true. He spent too much money, and so did George W. Bush. We should be able to go after both parties on this. DeSantis, as governor of Florida, has forced cuts. He has brought down 25% of the debt in Florida. Same thing with Walker. That's another reason I like Scott Walker. They were actually paying down the debt, and they were making their states fiscally sound. We need that in Washington. And I see Governor DeSantis, he has the character and the courage to stand up to these abuses. I am really impressed. It just saddens me that DeSantis is Trump with results, and nobody, and so many Trump people don't care. I just don't understand. I really don't. Some of the criticisms that I've heard from people, well, there's these deep state connections. Like which? Seriously, I'm asking, which deep state connections? Jeb Bush was at his inauguration in 2019. So what? All the former governors in a state, they often attend the inauguration of the new president or the new governor. Bill Clinton was at Trump's inauguration. Are we going to say Trump was deep state? Maybe they should have said it, because like I said, that same day he's giving a standing ovation to crooked Hillary. I understand that Paul Ryan got behind DeSantis, but then Paul Ryan says, I'm not a culture war guy. DeSantis is. If you're going to play the endorsement game, you got to play it all the way. David Duke endorsed Trump. Richard Spencer endorsed Trump, and we all know that was garbage. And Trump even ultimately dismissed them. You can't play the endorsement game alone as an excuse not to support DeSantis. That's ridiculous. You got to look at record, you got to look at results, as well as rhetoric. So that is a flimsy excuse. And one of my favorites especially, some of the current Trumpers, they would try to tease me and say, well, didn't you know that George Soros endorsed DeSantis? Like, if you're going to lie to me, try a little harder. I mean, that was the most pathetic attempt to try to delegitimize DeSantis. I saw the George Soros statement, and he said very clearly, I predict that DeSantis will be the nominee. A prediction is not an endorsement, folks. Michael Moore of Roger and Me fame, Michael Moore predicted that Trump would win in 2016. But he voted for Bernie in the primary, and he voted for Hillary in the general. He didn't endorse Trump. He predicted he would win. And it's the same thing with George Soros. And on that note, every one of the current Trumpers who keeps going after DeSantis, it's a lie. Whatever they use to attack him, it's a lie. It's just not true. You see how they spin it or they distort it. It's not true. It's just not there. Now, I know people really like the fact that he was politically incorrect. He spoke his mind. He really voiced the frustrations and the outrage that people had towards the Republican Party, towards the media establishment, towards every established institution. I get that. But folks, just because he made you feel good in 2016 doesn't mean that you should vote for him in 2024. You know, it's so funny. Conservatives, when it comes to politics, they act like liberals. They're driven by identity politics and feelings. But liberals, when it comes to politics, they're driven by facts, evidence, money, results. They politic like conservatives. And conservatives politic like liberals, driven by identity politics and feelings. And that is a losing strategy. We've got to start politicking like conservatives, focusing on results, focusing on money, focusing on how the money is spent, focusing on where we can get the most results, how we get the best candidates elected, not going by feeling, not going by inference, not going by, I think Herschel Walker would be a great candidate just because he was on my one episode of, Celebrity Apprentice. No, you got to be serious. There's a mechanics to politics and campaigning, and it's time to put aside feelings and do the right thing. DeSantis delivers. DeSantis gets it done. Now, I'm not afraid to be critical of DeSantis. I mean, Florida is not the Second Amendment sanctuary it could be. He's been Bloomberg's money is a wash in the Florida legislature. Most people aren't aware of this, but that's how the red flag laws got passed in 2018. DeSantis did not sign off on that. DeSantis did not support that. But those red flag laws are still there, and he needs to get rid of those. Florida has not made itself a Second Amendment sanctuary. He needs to do that. But I want you to notice, when I criticize DeSantis, it's because he hasn't done enough. Notice how he did something bad. I want you to notice that. And we should do that with all politicians. We should expect them to do more and to do better. And let me look at a couple other things. Okay, so one person left a comment. Ron DeSantis has fundraised with Log Cabin. Okay, you know what? If he has, that's wrong. And that's bad. And I think that's wrong. But I'm looking at results. Donald Trump was okay with the Disrespect for Marriage Act. Donald Trump celebrated Pride Month. DeSantis has never done that. And again, results. DeSantis not only repealed the protections for sexual orientation and gender identity in state government, he also vetoed funding for a Pulse nightclub memorial. He signed off on the Parents' Rights in Education legislation. He also banned sex mutilation of minors. He passed the comprehensive legislation to keep men out of women's facilities, not just the sports, but all facilities, out of bathrooms, locker rooms. This was a bill that hurt Governor Pat McCrory in North Carolina. Well, it didn't hurt him. It's that he was weak. He didn't step into the fight enough. They passed a bill. It was Senate Bill 2 in North Carolina. I think it was in 2015 that kept males out of female facilities. DeSantis did it, and he's never backed down. Never backed down. He opposed the Disrespect for Marriage Act. I trust him more on fighting the LGBT stuff than DeSantis. Than Trump. It's that simple. I'm looking at results. I'm looking at results. I'm looking at results. I know there's a group called Gays for DeSantis, but you know what? I don't see DeSantis pandering to them. In fact, they have to pander to him. They have to support the Parents' Rights in Education stuff, because homosexual activists on both sides of the aisle have been pushing to normalize this garbage in the schools as well as in the public square. I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat. I am aware the head of Gays Against Groomers, which is a total shameful grift, they love DeSantis. But you know what? I don't care. Like I said, the endorsement game, you can't make that. That's not a game I'm going to play. I'm not going to play that game. Well, he's got these endorsements. So what? Trump had some bad endorsements too. Keep in mind also that now Donald Trump, he's endorsing or embracing endorsements from Black Lives Matter. Oh, tell me, current Trumpers, are you okay with that? And then you make excuses for that. Black Lives Matter is a cultural Marxist hate group. And now you have Trump pandering to them, pandering to identity politics. Like I said, conservatives are in the campaign mode are driven by feelings and identity politics. And I'm sick of it. All right, so I respond to that too. And I do know, and I'll be critical of this, Ron DeSantis gave a onesie to Dave Rubin and his fake husband. That's wrong. And I will say that. That's not right. But you know what? I'm looking at the governor and his policies, and he's done an excellent job fighting LGBT. I want this guy. Governor DeSantis made a clear argument. Are we going to be a society based on truth or based on deceit? You see, it's motivated by more than clicks, views, and shares. It's motivated by principles. And DeSantis is governed by principles, so he governs by principles. Come on, current Trump people. Are you all about feelings or do you care about results? So there was another person who commented, deplorable is here from Wyoming. Okay. but I can even share that person does agree with me that she doesn't like that Trump is positive with LGBT. But to sum up, and I wrote an article about this, people still see Trump as a symbol of fighting the system. And what I'm trying to tell you is he didn't fight the system. He ended up going along with it. He surrounded himself with bad people. If they flatter him, he likes them. And here's proof of it, even to this day that he's doing it. Lindsey Graham. Every time that Trump is in South Carolina, he's got Lindsey Graham right next to him. And Trump goes, we're going to go after the Democrats. We're going to go after the deep state. We're going to go after the rhinos. And you got Lindsey Graham right next to you, who's deep state, Democrat, rhino, all rolled into one. Give me a break. Cut the crap. And a current Trump supporter I know here in Torrance, he had to acknowledge that's bad. And I just have to tell you, there was another current Trump supporter last week. Trump knows how to connect with people. Trump knows how to connect with people. You know what? So does a used car salesman. Vivek Ramaswamy. He's very articulate, very smart. He's willing to say bold stuff. I don't believe that he believes a word of what he says. Ramaswamy was all in on the medical surveillance state. He wanted to quarantine people. Ramaswamy called Donald Trump a big baby, compared him to Stacey Abrams. He believed Ramaswamy in 2022 wrote a book and said Donald Trump lost. Now, this year, he says Donald Trump won. He has perfected the cynical art of a lot of these media influencers. They put on a MAGA hat. They tell you one thing, and then to another audience, they tell you something else, and then they justify themselves speaking two things out of their mouths. And I'm not going to tolerate that. None of us should. What can I say? I've been here on the camera now for an hour, spilling my guts, letting the kitty litter out of the bag, so to speak, because I don't think I can have this conversation peacefully with friends of mine who are current Trump supporters. I think the only way forward is just to go, hey, you support whoever you want, I'll support whoever I want, and that's the way it is. I'm pretty sure there's not a lot of traffic right now, in part because people don't want to talk about this. They're okay with Trump, they don't care. We've got one lady who's written some comments agreeing with me. He doesn't acknowledge his mistakes. Exactly. DeSantis even apologized for doing initial health orders. He cried. This is wrong. And he changed things. But I'm not moved because he cried. I'm glad he started doing the right thing. Kids went to school in Florida. People got their jobs in Florida. The economy was stronger in Florida. Freedoms have expanded in Florida. They've banned vaccine mandates. They've banned mask mandates in Florida. They took care of business in Florida. And back to the crime issue. Trump tweets law and order, and then he pounds his chest for letting criminals out of jail early. One of the defenses people keep giving for Trump is, well, he was frustrated and he was stabbed in the back. No, he wasn't stabbed in the back. He surrounded himself with people who flattered him and undercut his agenda, and he didn't care. He didn't care. He was stabbed in the face, if you got to use that metaphor. There were plenty of qualified people he could have appointed to many different agencies. Ann Coulter talks about Chris Kobach repeatedly, who's the current attorney general in Kansas, who had authored and studied all of the powers that the president currently possesses to enforce the laws and to stop the illegal immigration insanity. Chris Kobach, and I'm listening to Ann Coulter talk about this guy, and boy, he really got the job done. And he would have been a great fit. You got to get the right people. Personnel is policy, and Trump not only failed on that point, he still surrounds himself with bad people. I mentioned Lindsey Graham, Jason Miller. All of these people are grifters. They are cynical people who are out for a buck and out for headlines. I totally agree with that. He doesn't mention his mistakes. He doesn't acknowledge that it was wrong to push the vaccine on people so quickly. Other things I wasn't aware of. Donald Trump is okay with 5G. That's a problem. Donald Trump went to the UN and said, we're going to decriminalize homosexuality all over the world, lecturing Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. Excuse me, we shouldn't be normalizing homosexuality. And second of all, that's a globalist perspective. Shouldn't you be focusing on America? What's going on here? The person in the comment mentions Ivanka and Jared Kushner. Yes, they were both bad, and Trump allowed them to stick around. That's not acceptable. Not acceptable. DeSantis is Trump with results. But it seems to me that current Trumpers are caught up in the wonders of yesteryear. They talk about the economy, they talk about cheaper gas, all of which he threw away with COVID. And I'm telling you, you elect Trump. Look, I'll give him the benefit of the benefit. Trump's the nominee. I could see him winning the election. But you're going to get double whatever you got the last time. He'll be a lame duck. He can't run for re-election. He'll be free from any kind of limitation. I could see him doing another lockdown. He won't go after anybody. He talks, but then doesn't do it. DeSantis talks and walks. And that's something I want to be able to share with everybody. But it's just amazing to me the mental gymnastics that so many current Trump supporters go through to keep supporting him. And I'm so tired of it. I've had to bite my tongue because I don't want to have the shouting match. But here we are. And let's not forget, Trump went behind McCarthy when even members of the Republican conference frustrated his, and thankfully so they did. They motioned to vacate. McCarthy was a terrible leader. He should have never been speaker. They finally got rid of him. I'm not saying the job is done. I mean, we've got Tony Johnson, and he's failing too. I think they should do another motion to vacate. Although, I mean, the larger discussion is there are incentive structure issues, there are other political issues. It's a larger discussion, and DeSantis has had that discussion, by the way. Just saying. Trump has bad sense. He has no real policy vision. DeSantis does. DeSantis wants to clean out academia. That is a huge issue. Jordan Peterson has been talking about how conservatives have abandoned the need to reform education from K through 12 to private to university. DeSantis does. He has already put through a classical program, curricula. He goes after the AP stuff. He starts fights and he wins those fights. Donald Trump said that there'd be so much winning we would get tired of winning. But after 2016, it's been nothing but losing. Nothing but losing. And I'm tired of it. I don't understand why current Trump supporters are still okay with it. So I thought this was going to be a short video. It has turned into a long video. This is an hour plus, and I can understand if a lot of people didn't want to watch it, don't want to watch it, don't care, because a lot of the people whom I'm friends with on an active basis, they're still Trump supporters. But I just feel compelled to make my case in this regard. I just am astonished at how, to such an extent, it's become, well, I go back to what I said. It's feelings and identity politics, or personality. Oh, I just like Trump. I like the things he said. But a president is supposed to be an executive. He's supposed to do stuff. And Trump didn't get the job done, folks. And now he makes excuses. He was in Iowa, not once but twice. He's like, well, I really couldn't make Mexico pay for it. There was no real way to do it. Lie. That is not true. Even in 2016, numerous commentators told him, as president, he has the authority to impose a tax on the remittances to Mexico. Yes, he could have. He chose not to do it. That is a lie. It is also a lie that he couldn't do anything about the January 6 people. That is just really egregious. I have to go right back to that. You know, he really fomented the crowd. He said, fight like hell. And then you had people attacking the Capitol building, and then they went in. There were just so many mistakes that day, and he could have issued a blanket pardon. And this goes back to the point that was made in the comments. Trump makes mistakes, and he doesn't acknowledge them. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. That kind of double-down arrogance we don't need. And arrogance plus ignorance is a really bad combination. DeSantis learns from mistakes. DeSantis grows his policy goals. He has a vision. He follows through. He gets stuff done. And we need more of that. I am proud to support Governor Ron DeSantis. I've made some phone calls for him. I've never made phone calls for a presidential candidate, not even for Trump. But I've done it for DeSantis because that's how much I like DeSantis. This isn't just anti-Trump, folks, and it's not just a one-issue thing for me. I like the guy. He reminds me of Javier Milei, but even more conservative. Javier Milei gets elected. He's doing great stuff. I love what's happening in Argentina. Can't we have that kind of competence and courage? I want that kind of courage in our executive, and yet we still can't seem to get it. Another comment. Trump endorsed John Cox for governor in 2018. Once again, Trump followed bad advice and didn't think twice and did not care. I'm tired of it. DeSantis worked hard to get better conservatives elected to the state legislature. Most people don't know about that. He and Kim Reynolds, they are very strong in this regard. They backed conservative primary challengers to get rid of rhinos in the state legislature so that they could get better legislation passed, because they're not dictators. DeSantis is not a dictator. He doesn't have to be. He knows the powers that he has as Florida governor. He is, and this is something else I love about DeSantis. He is ready to go on day one. He's already done the homework. He knows the people he wants to appoint. He knows the powers that he has. He knows the people he wants to put into key positions in his cabinet. He is ready to go. I've seen him do it, and I know he will. And here's the last thing. Here I've been talking for more than an hour. If Trump is the nominee, I am not going to vote for him. Not this time. I won't. I'm just not going to do it. I'll vote for everything else. I will write in Governor DeSantis. That's what I'm going to do. I am not going to vote for Trump. I will never vote for John. I'm not going to vote for Biden. I am not going to vote for Kennedy. The guy is a progressive pretending to be a moderate. The guy has no courage. I'm not voting for him. I'm not going to vote for a libertarian who thinks baby killing is okay and same-sex marriage is okay. I'm not doing that. I will write in Governor DeSantis. That's it. So, thank you for letting me share. This is an hour plus. This is a lot of stuff I wanted to share, and I have not been willing to have this discussion because I know I'm not going to change minds, because people who still support Trump, they're driven by feelings and identity politics, and that's not, you can't change that here. You got to change it based on sentiment, experience, or other things. So that's what I accept. I appreciate all of you listening, all 5 of you, 2 of you, none of you, any of you. I appreciate your time. I'm going to keep this up, and I'm so glad I could share this. Please have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And here's the last thing. I said this is the last thing. Now this is the last thing. I am not sad. If DeSantis is the nominee, I will be ecstatic. I'll be thrilled. If he ends up losing the general election, I won't care. I know that I've supported a good guy. And it's the country's fault. The country sucks, and this country's going to suffer, and it deserves to suffer. If Trump is the nominee, you know what? It's like putting out a fleece and it's wet. I get this. I get the message. My politics is out of sync with a lot of the people I've interacted with. That'll kind of give me the permission to kind of disengage from politics, by and large. I'm okay with that. I look forward to doing other things with my life. I have nothing to lose. It's a win-win either way. So I'm going to be fine. But this country, I don't think, is going to survive. If Trump is the nominee, Biden's going to win. I don't see a way. And even if Trump does win, we're just going to get more of the failed same. We're going to get 4 more years of managed decline instead of absolute destruction. That's the difference. And I'm fed up with progressivism at the speed limit. I want to restore our culture. I want to restore our Constitution. I want to restore our country. Make America great again, right? I really want to do that. But if the voters want to go another way, hey, I can wash my hands of it, shake the dust from my shoes, and move on, and I'll be totally at peace. And no matter what happens, Governor DeSantis still has an estimable record that I can always appreciate, and nobody can take away. Thank you so much for your time. Merry Christmas, and have a Happy New Year.
Free, free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live